In the heart of Beijing, beneath golden rooftops and behind towering vermilion walls, lies one of history's most enigmatic fortresses of power, the Forbidden City. For over 2 centuries, it was home to China's Qing emperors and the silent empire that lived behind their thrones. To the outside world, the Imperial Harem was a place of beauty and submission, a world where women existed to serve the emperor's pleasure. But inside, behind the lacquered doors and embroidered curtains, another truth emerged. This was a court of influence, of strategic alliances, rivalries, and ambition. It was a hidden empire. It shaped the destiny of China in ways few ever realized. The Qing Dynasty's harem was a vast and complex institution, housing dozens, sometimes hundreds of women ranked with absolute precision. From the lowly servant girls to the all-powerful Empress Dowager, every woman had a title. But behind those titles lay a web of politics and survival. A new concubine entered the palace like a pawn on a chessboard, but in time, through intelligence, charm, or sheer cunning, she might rise to become the emperor's favorite, or even the empress. The stakes: life or death, power or exile, influence over the most powerful man in Asia or vanishing in obscurity. No woman embodied this hidden empire more than Empress Dowager Cixi. Once a low-ranking concubine, she rose through the ranks with quiet brilliance, and once her son ascended to the throne, she became the power behind the empire. Cixi didn't just influence decisions, she ruled. For nearly 5 decades, she controlled court appointments, foreign policy, military funding, while operating behind a silk screen. Her methods were subtle but firm. Ministers would kneel before a curtained, receiving the emperor receiving guidance from the woman seated behind it. This was power wrapped in silence, rule masked as suggestion. The hidden empire of the harem helped shape everything from imperial succession to foreign diplomacy. And, as the dynasty grew and later crumbled, its inner court played a role at every step, yet their influence remained largely invisible, hidden in footnotes and whispers. Today, visitors walk through the tranquil gardens and silent chambers of the Forbidden City, unaware of the dramas once played behind its walls, of the queens without crowns, and the empires they quietly ruled. They may have lived in the shadows of emperors, but in truth, they were architects of history ruling an empire. Behind the throne. In the grand halls of the Forbidden City, power wasn't just inherited, it was chosen, and nowhere was that more evident than in the secretive, ritualized, and often ruthless tradition known as the Imperial Beauty Selections, or Zhuan, held once every 3 years. These selections were no ordinary ceremonies. They were nationwide searches for beauty, purity, and potential, an imperial harvest of young girls from noble and common families alike. For the chosen few, the reward was entrance into the inner court. For the rest, it meant a return home, in silence or a lifetime in obscurity. But behind the grandeur of the tradition lay a system that was deeply controlling. Participation was not optional. Girls, often as young as 13 or 14, were summoned by imperial decree. Families, especially those from the Manchu banner clans, had no choice. Refusal was not only dishonorable but dangerous. Their daughters were taken from their homes, transported under guard to the capital, and brought before the eyes of the empire. There, the process began. In massive palace halls, candidates were lined up, examined, and evaluated with cold precision. Officials assessed physical beauty, body proportions, skin tone, and health. No detail was too small, no imperfection overlooked, but beauty alone wasn't enough. Each girl was interrogated and observed for traits like discipline, composure, literacy, and moral conduct. Could she walk gracefully? Could she speak with elegance? Could she maintain poise under pressure? Any sign of defiance, shyness, or sickness could mean immediate dismissal. One by one, they were ranked like possessions, categorized as fit for service as maids, attendants, or potential consorts. The most promising were recorded in detail and presented to the emperor or the Empress Dowager for final approval. For the fortunate few who were selected, a new life began, but not one of luxury. First came training. Inside the palace, these girls became part of a strict system governed by hierarchy and discipline. They were taught court etiquette, rituals, speech, and silence. They were given new clothes, new duties, and often new names, erasing their identities from before. Their lives were no longer their own. Their future now depended on the whims of the emperor, the shifting alliances of the court, and their ability to survive the quiet war of the inner court. For some, this path led to power. For others, it led to loneliness, manipulation, or exile. Within the very walls they were taught to revere, the imperial beauty selection was not a fairy tale. It was a system of control and sacrifice, disguised as honor, a tradition where girls became symbols, and women became tools of empire, and it all began with a single, silent decree: she is chosen. Behind the towering gates of the Forbidden City, beyond the splendor of imperial halls and dragon-carved thrones, existed a world few dared to question, a world both beautiful and unyielding. This was the inner court, a gilded prison known as much for its luxury as for its silence. To outsiders, it shimmered with elegance. But to those who lived inside, it was often a cage of silk and gold. The women of the imperial harem concubines, attendants, empresses lived in carefully measured quarters designed not for freedom, but for control. The layout of the palace itself reflected the rigid order of the court. Walls within walls, gates within gates, every door monitored, every corridor patrolled. Their movement was restricted by architecture. Each residence was designed according to a woman's rank. The higher her title, the closer she lived to the emperor's quarters. The lower, the farther away both in distance and in dignity. Even their meals, clothing, and servants were strictly regulated, all dictated by the laws of the inner court. But physical confinement was just the beginning of visible boundary that masked far deeper forms of control. Beyond the high walls and locked gates, the women of the harem were bound by invisible chains, relentless surveillance, rigid hierarchies, emotional isolation, and the unspoken fear of falling from favor. Their bodies were confined by architecture, but their minds were imprisoned by expectation, manipulation, and silence. Surveillance was constant. Eunuchs and senior maids loyal only to the palace hierarchy watched every interaction, recorded every misstep. Letters were censored, visitors were limited. Spies moved in silence, reporting every whisper to higher powers. Trust was dangerous. Privacy non-existent. Psychological control was even more insidious. Women were pit against each other, forced to compete for attention, favor, and rank. Jealousy, fear, and loneliness were built into the system. The palace encouraged it because a divided harem was easier to rule. One wrong word, one false rumor, one dream spoken aloud could end a life for worse. Bury it in silence. Many women never saw the outside world again after entering the Forbidden City. Their names vanished from records. Their voices were lost behind carved screens and silk curtains. And yet, the court expected them to smile, to sing, to serve. They wore embroidered gowns and golden hairpins, but beneath the ornaments lived quiet grief and a deep, aching need to endure. This was not just a home of power. It was a world built on obedience, hierarchy, and isolation. It was a masterpiece of imperial design engineered to command loyalty, contain rebellion, and mask suffering in elegance. It was a palace, yes, but for many, it was also a prison, a cage, wrapped in silk and gold. In the vast world of the Qing Imperial Harem, power was fragile and often hidden in the most intimate of places. The emperor's bedchamber. A single night spent with the emperor could transform a woman's life. From an overlooked consort to a favored concubine, her rank could soar overnight. This was the heart of the harem's secret politics, a game played not with swords or scrolls, but with whispers, glances, and whispered promises. Within the silk chambers, women competed fiercely for the emperor's attention. His favor was more than affectionate, was a currency that granted privileges, influence, and status. A favored consort enjoyed better living quarters, more servants, and greater access to the emperor's ear. She could petition for family members, promotions, sway court appointments, and even influence imperial decisions. But such favor came with a price. Jealousy ran deep, often turning lethal. Rival consorts would scheme in shadows, forming alliances, and plotting downfall. Rumors were weapons. A careless word could spark a palace scandal, sending a woman spiraling into disgrace or worse, banishment and death. The bedchamber was a stage of political intrigue, masked by beauty and ritual. Yet power was never guaranteed. The emperor's whims could shift like the wind. Today's favorite might be tomorrow's forgotten shadow. Women lived in constant uncertainty, balancing grace with cunning, patience with ambition. Beneath the layers of silk and perfume lay a battleground of survival. For some, bearing the emperor's son was the ultimate victory, a direct path to securing their future and legacy. Sons elevated their mothers to the highest ranks, sometimes even to the revered position of Empress Dowager. For others, the silence of rejection meant a slow, painful fade into obscurity. The politics of the bedchamber shaped the fate of empires not just through lineage, but through the quiet, invisible struggles of the women who ruled behind the throne. In this hidden world, power was measured not by crowns or armies, but in whispers shared beneath moonlit silk. Within the glittering walls of the Forbidden City, beneath embroidered silk and perfumed halls, a far darker battle raged, a war waged not with swords, but with secrets and subtle cruelty. Jealousy among the imperial concubines was more than whispered rivalries. It was a deadly game of survival. Behind painted smiles and delicate gestures lay a ruthless struggle for power and favor. The stakes were life itself. Some women resorted to the most chilling tactics, secret abortions, quietly ending pregnancies that threatened a rival's rise. Others slipped slow poisons into tea, meals, or cosmetics subtle enough to escape suspicion, but cruel enough to end a rival's life over time. These acts of quiet violence were whispered legends, passed down through generations. They were the hidden scars of a palace that demanded obedience but tolerated no weakness. Alliances formed and shattered in the blink of an eye. Friendships were fragile facades, masking schemes and betrayal. One misstep, one overheard conversation could mean exile to a distant palace wing, or worse, death by decree. Even the emperor, the ultimate prize, was a pawn in this game. His favor could be manipulated, stolen, or poisoned. For many women, survival meant mastering this cruel dance, balancing charm with suspicion, kindness with manipulation. The inner court was a place where love and hatred intertwined, where loyalty was bought with secrets, and smiles often concealed deadly intentions. In this cage of silk and gold, the greatest danger came not from outside forces but from the women who lived behind the throne. At the pinnacle of the Forbidden City's hierarchy stood the empresses, the most powerful women in the empire. Yet, even they were bound by invisible chains. Power came with a heavy price. Empresses lived under constant scrutiny, trapped in a delicate balance between reverence and fear. Their every word and gesture was weighed by court politics and palace intrigue. One misstep could mean the swift fall from grace. Losing the emperor's favor was not just a personal loss, it was a public disgrace that could erase a lifetime of influence in an instant. Betrayal lurked in every corner. Allies could turn into enemies overnight. Trusted confidants might leak secrets to rivals. Even family ties were fragile in a court where loyalty was often a currency to be traded. The empress's existence was a paradox, a life of immense power and profound isolation. She wielded authority over thousands yet remained vulnerable to whispers and rumors. Behind the ceremonial robes and jeweled crowns, many empresses felt like prisoners confined by palace walls and the expectations of an empire. Some were locked away in loneliness, their voices silenced despite their rank. Others faced exile or forced retirement, cast aside like forgotten relics when their usefulness waned. Their fates were tied not just to their own strength, but to the shifting tides of favor and fortune within the court. But, in the Forbidden City, power was never absolute. It was a gilded cage, a throne, forged from fear as much as respect. Even the most exalted women were, in the end, empresses in chains. Behind the velvet curtains of the Imperial Harem, few figures were as enigmatic and as powerful as the eunuchs. These castrated men served as the palace's gatekeepers, entrusted with the keys to secret chambers and the whispers of forbidden conversations. But their role was far more complex than mere servants. Eunuchs were the empire's eyes and ears within the Forbidden City. They acted as spies, observing every movement, recording every secret. Through them, messages flowed silently between the emperor, empresses, and concubines, often carrying hidden meanings and veiled threats. Some eunuchs wielded influence that rivaled the highest ministers. They controlled access to the emperor's presence, and could shape court decisions by controlling what reached the throne. In many cases, eunuchs became trusted confidants or even lovers of the women in the harem, blurring lines of power and loyalty. Their unique position allowed them to manipulate palace politics with subtlety and precision. By forming alliances, spreading rumors, or withholding information, eunuchs could elevate one woman's status or destroy another's reputation overnight. Yet, their own lives were marked by vulnerability. Eunuchs were outsiders, neither fully accepted by the women they served, nor by the male court officials. Their survival depended on navigating the dangerous currents of palace intrigue with care. In this secretive world, eunuchs were both protectors and predators, keepers of order and masters of manipulation. They held terrifying power over the lives of women in the harem, power that was invisible, intangible, but deeply felt. In the Forbidden City, the eunuchs were the unseen hands that shaped destiny behind every closed door. Within the walls of the Forbidden City, silence was demanded, but it was never absolute. Beneath the layers of silk and protocol, the women of the Imperial Harem found subtle ways to resist a quiet defiance that whispered their existence to the world beyond. Their rebellion was not loud or violent. It was hidden in the smallest acts: letters sewn into hems of garments, secret messages passed in whispers, and coded embroidery that spoke in symbols only the initiated could understand. These were messages of hope, despair, and courage, meant to be discovered long after the women who wrote them were gone. Secret alliances formed between concubines, attendants, and even eunuchs, alliances forged not just for survival, but for dignity and solidarity. In the privacy of their chambers, women shared stories, passed on knowledge, and preserved their identities despite attempts to erase them. Some found strength in spiritual practices, prayers and meditations that fortified their minds against the oppressive weight of palace life. Others resisted through subtle sabotage, deliberate mistakes in daily tasks, or small acts of disobedience that challenged the strict rules without inviting punishment. These silent rebellions were acts of courage, proof that even in the most confined spaces, the human spirit sought freedom. Through these hidden resistances, the women of the Forbidden City told the world, "I existed. I mattered. I was more than a shadow behind a throne." Their voices may have been quiet, but their legacy endures. In the gleaming halls of the Forbidden City, where beauty and power mingled, a darker reality lurked, one of harsh punishments and cruel consequences. For a concubine, disobedience was not simply frowned upon, it could be deadly. Those who displeased the emperor or fell out of favor faced terrifying fates. Banishment was common, a sudden exile to the infamous Cold Palace, a grim wing of the Forbidden City where forgotten women lived in isolation and despair. The Cold Palace was a prison without walls, an endless winter of loneliness, stripped of status, comfort, and hope. Physical punishment was brutal and swift. Beatings administered by eunuchs or palace guards left lasting scars, both visible and hidden. Public humiliation was another weapon of control. Women might be stripped of their titles, their names erased from records, erased from memory. Some were confined to small, dark rooms for months or years, their only companions, shadows and silence. The threat of punishment kept the harem in line, reinforcing the emperor's absolute authority. Yet, beneath the fear, many women endured, some finding resilience, others succumbing to despair. This shadowed side of palace life reveals the true cost of power behind the throne, where loyalty was demanded, but rebellion was met with merciless reprisal. In the Forbidden City, punishment was a tool to control not just bodies but spirits, and to remind all that favor was fragile, and survival a constant battle. Long after the silk curtains of the Forbidden City fell silent, the legacy of the Qing harem endured, etched deep into the fabric of China's history. These women, once confined behind golden walls, shaped the course of an empire in ways both visible and unseen. Through their struggles for favor and survival, they influenced imperial succession, foreign diplomacy, and court politics, quiet architects behind decisions that rippled across continents. But their stories also reveal a deeper truth about the nature of power and gender. In a world where beauty was not just admired, but wielded as a powerful weapon, and silence was carefully cultivated as a crucial strategy, the women of the Qing harem moved cautiously within a gilded cage, an opulent prison where every glance, every word, and every gesture could mean the difference between survival and ruin. In this delicate and dangerous dance, survival demanded not only sacrifice and resilience, but also sharp cunning, unyielding patience, and quiet courage in the face of constant uncertainty and fierce rivalry. Their lives were marked by sorrow, jealousy, and loss, yet also by resilience and subtle rebellion. The Qing harem was far more than a hidden corner of imperial life or a passing footnote. In history, it was a living reflection of the human cost of absolute power. Within its silken chambers and shadowed corridors, generations of women bore the weight of an empire's ambitions. Their lives were shaped, silenced, and sacrificed in service to a throne they could never sit upon. Their identities reduced to rank and favor, their fates determined not by merit but by proximity to power. The harem revealed the quiet violence of a system that exalted the emperor, but consumed the women around him. By understanding their lives, we gain insight into the enduring struggles faced by women across cultures and eras, women who, even when constrained by circumstance, find ways to assert their agency. Today, the Forbidden City stands as a monument not only to imperial grandeur, but to they were the silent empires of women, unseen sovereigns who lived in the shadows of emperors, yet ruled with quiet influence from behind embroidered curtains and closed palace doors. Though history rarely spoke their names, their choices shaped dynasties, swayed emperors, and steered the fate of a nation. Their legacy is woven not just from sorrow and confinement, but from astonishing strength, strategic brilliance, and an unyielding will to survive. In a world that was never truly theirs, behind the throne, they endured. In that endurance, they ruled.